Our second lesson comes to us from Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayers. Awe came upon everyone, because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any had need. Day by day, as they spent time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This is the word of the Lord. This passage from Acts follows Peter preaching at the first Pentecost and the addition of 3,000 new disciples. Some of those disciples returned to their homes scattered across the Mediterranean world. But a goodly number of those were locals or pilgrims who decided to stay. And they joined this new faith community. Our lesson for today describes the foundation of the community and how they live together. These new adherents spent time learning from the apostles. They worked to build the community. Although it says they ate in their homes, we also know from further reading in Acts, they also ate together, both the formal Eucharist meal and probably normal meals. They spent time in prayer. This passage also tells us they worshiped, usually in the temple. One of the outcomes of this was wonders and signs performed by the apostles. This led to awe among the people. You can also translate that word as fear. But this isn't the fear that paralyzes, but a sense that one is in the presence of the holy, divine, overwhelming love of God. Acts gives us only a few examples of these wonders and signs. There were miracles of healing, we know. There were acts of courage in the face of persecution. There was great generosity. Luke limited specifics, I think, because he knew that wonders and signs God would perform in other faith communities would be varied, unique, and specific to those communities. Consider, for example, the history of Thyatira. In sometimes the wonders and signs performed by God through disciples was that our forefathers and foremothers remained faithful through difficult times and were able to pass the church on to future generations. That faithful endurance spoken of in Revelation and adopted in this congregation's vision statement. At other times, it was love shown to one another, even when there was deep conflict. You've been part of God reaching across miles and languages and culture to bring healing to other people. You have a history of sharing meals with your community that draws folks from inside and outside the church. And what about the wonders and signs happening right now in your community? Well, the meals are starting to happen again. This is a day when we can tell we do have a very active children's choir and vibrant Sunday school program that is amazing because you cancel those and worship attendance also drops. Despite being a church with very strong family connections, you make visitors feel welcome. Another amazing sign of God's presence here is the number of gifted leaders that exist in this congregation. And despite having strong leaders, you listen very well to each other. Many weeks, as we did today, you share good news from your life. And an important thing happens when we are willing to share good news in the congregation. We learn to share it with others who we encounter outside of the church. We learn in those moments of asking the congregation for good news, we learn to testify to what God is doing in our lives. And a congregation that can testify to good news through actions and words is another wonder that shows God's love. The people in Acts developed a level of closeness and trust and generosity that far exceeds the level of caring seen in many churches. They were selling off items of value they possessed so they could help the needy. They actually shared many of their resources, which were likely for most of them very minimal, with one another as there was needs. They regularly interacted with each other, got to know each other, likely visited one another in their homes. They cared for the poor around them in Jerusalem to such a degree that they began to be respected and treated as a community with great honor. They fulfilled the prophetic words Jesus spoke when he said they will know his followers by the love they show to one another. Now this phrase, this idea that we see in Acts of sharing all things in common is guaranteed to make folks quite nervous. It sounds downright socialist, doesn't it? There are very few people, be they conservative or liberal in our culture, who would be comfortable trying this approach. We see later in Acts that even the Jerusalem church struggled to make this work. And there is a history of this happening sometimes in Christian tradition. Monastic communities in the Roman Catholic and Orthodox traditions strove to follow this example. There's even a few Protestant examples of this approach. The Bruderhof communities were originally founded in 1920 Germany. Their theological roots are Anabaptist. They share all things in common. They're committed fully to nonviolence. Unless you think these are left-wing radicals, they're also strongly pro-life. The example of the First Jerusalem faith community, I think, is there to challenge us. We should be striving to be more generous with each other and with the church and with those who have true need. We should be working to get to know one another better. We should be spending time working to build up one another's families. We should be spending more time studying and praying and worshiping. You know, every church is seeking to know what's the secret to growth. Most churches are not just seeking members, but they want a steady growth of witness and impact on community and mission, as well as those new members. The writer of Acts would point to Acts 2:27 through 47. Study the Bible. Worship often. Pray. Care for one another with an extravagant generosity. Fellowship with one another, and that means truly getting to know each other. Take care of the needs in the community around you in ways that build others up. God will add to your numbers when the church does this. And there's good news in all this challenging work. Thyatira is very capable of doing these things, and many of you are already doing. Not only do you provide a wonderful Sunday school program for children, you have 3 different offerings for adults. 2 of which focus on study and 1 on prayer. You offer worship filled with good news and music from adults and children that moves the heart. You're learning to flex your fellowship and service muscles again as we come out of COVID. And let me say a particular word about this issue about generosity, particularly the generosity of Thyatira. At the beginning of this year, the elders recognized we needed to speak more directly and honestly about money in the church. Too often, this is a topic we treat as forbidden in churches. The honest message that the fellowship and the financial team and the stewardship team put together was that the church had allowed its deficit to grow, and it hadn't done enough on the giving side. Thyatira needed those who were able to be more generous. And they laid the challenge before the church very clearly, and the folks who heard it, as in Acts, were invited to bring the resources to meet their need. And we have made a good start. We have had a couple of months now where giving is exceeding our costs, and that's a good thing. I encourage you to be as generous as you are able and plan on continuing that habit in the future years. You know, the other piece of good news in this passage can be found when we realize that God has more wonders and signs to do right in our midst. God is just getting started with the work that this congregation is going to be doing. So I invite you to join the communities and groups that are working to bring about those things, and get your pens ready and write those cards, and look for other opportunities of service that the church can be involved in. The church in Acts powerfully reminds us the church has never been a spectator sport. The acts of generous sharing in common, of prayer, of breaking bread together, of spending a time with one another, of worship, of helping meet one another's needs, and sharing that love to the community is done by the people of God. Thyatira has so much to give. Be a part of that giving each and every day, and God will add to our